All right, well, welcome everybody. My name is Satin Blair. I am going to be your facilitator today. I am the career consultant for the School of EPS and IS. I have an undergraduate degree in business as well as a master's in career and technical education. For the past few years, I've been working overseas with the Marine Corps, teaching them about employment and interviewing techniques and resumes and all that stuff. And so today, I am joined by my colleague and co-facilitator here, Carlos. So today we are actually going to discuss interviewing with certainty during uncertain times. Carlos, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I've been with the Career Center for almost 3 years now. Started off as an employer relations coordinator, working with different companies, bringing them on campus, getting them connected to students, having interviews, having events. And then I moved over to career consultant, where I get to work with engineering, computer science, as well as natural science and math, and be able to teach all these wonderful courses and topics. And really excited to still be able to bring it to you in this type of format now that we have the virtual power hours. Today, we have a lot of good stuff planned for you, so glad you're here, glad you're attending. And then we have more things planned out throughout the rest of the month, so stay tuned. And looking forward to hearing your questions. So go ahead and put your questions and comments in the Q&A box, and we can answer those live, and we can make sure we address everything that you need.
Yes, so there is just a few housekeeping things. There is a bit of a delay between when you type in your questions and hit send until when we get them. So please kind of give us a little leeway in answering your questions. We will receive the questions and then Carlos will either interject or maybe we'll hold on to them for a while, but we will make sure those questions are answered. As far as things we're going to cover today, this is a really meaty topic, right? I mean, interviewing, we could sit here and we could coach this session like all day long. We could practice all day long. So it's a pretty heavy topic. So I'm going to try to touch on the basics. I'm going to talk to you about types of interview questions, kind of what interview questions you should kind of be preparing for, how to answer those types of interview questions, and then we're going to go over like some best practices. As far as the types of interviews, we will kind of talk a little more in depth about virtual interviewing as well as different types of interviewing. With COVID and everything that has happened, you know, a lot of us are interacting online, right? And so that's not going to go away. So we are going to take some time to kind of talk about virtual interviewing more in depth than we might the rest of the interviews. But please, I mean, if you have questions about face-to-face interviews, things like that, usually my answer is not going to vary a whole lot, you know, on some of those things, but please ask them as well. I do like to kind of open all of my seminars by asking participants to start thinking about what you came here for. If you have like specific questions, like right off the bat, you know that you came to the seminar for X, Y, and Z, you can go ahead and ask those questions now. I'm not going to go ahead and answer them. Hopefully, as we go along, I will answer them, but go ahead and, you know, start thinking about the questions, what you came here for. So if I don't cover that topic, we can circle back around to it and cover it for you, because I want to make sure that everybody that attends today gets what they came for. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. And Carlos, just let me know if anything comes in or if you have anything to add at any time. You know, we've done this together before.
Sure.
All right. So first, I kind of like to talk about what is an interview. And if we were in a more live format, I'd kind of get you guys to chime in and everything like that. And you're more than welcome to share your comments in the chat bar with me. But basically, an interview is your resume is going to land you that interview. That interview is going to land you that job, right? So that's kind of how you think of this interview. This interview is actually a kind of Q&A kind of style, get to know you. And don't think of an interview as the company assessing you. It's not that one-sided. You are also assessing the company. I have in my career had some bad interviews. I just didn't vibe well with the people that I was interviewing with. And so that for me was a red flag. So when I was called back, I was like, you know what? I don't think this is the right fit for me. So that's something that you want to think about too. This is not just the employer seeing if you're the right fit. This is your opportunity to make sure that that company is a right fit for you. And if they're not, start asking yourself those questions. Why? What didn't go well? What kind of questions do you have? So the process of an interview is to make sure that one or both of you fit within the company, that you're interviewing for. So there are different types of interviews. Depending on who you ask, somebody might throw in other types of interviews. Generally, typically what we see is kind of a one-on-one format. The candidate meets with one person. It could be the hiring manager. It could be an HR professional, and there might be more than one-on-one interview. You might meet with HR, and then you might meet with the hiring manager, and then you might meet with the hiring manager's supervisor, right? But typically, this is probably the most common type of interview that people have seen. It's definitely the more common type of interview that I've participated in. I would say the second most common is probably the panel interview. I've done several panel interviews, and I think they are becoming more and more common. I know candidates get super nervous about panel interviews, right? Because you're not dealing with one person anymore. You're dealing with 3 to 5 people. And that can be intimidating for some people, but I like to remind everyone that with a panel, you get more than one shot to impress the employer. So I have been on panels where we are interviewing candidates and 2 of us love the candidate and 1 of us does not. The one that didn't, they got their vote, it was heard, but ultimately, the 2 of us that agreed, that's the candidate we went with. So if you've got a panel of 3 to 5 people, you have 3 to 5 shots to impress somebody, right? So don't let a panel intimidate you. A group interview, I've actually done one of these as well. Group interviews are different from panel interviews because the group is actually the pool of candidates. So you and, in my case, it was 25 other candidates were all called to interview on the same day in front of 3 people, and they asked the same questions to all of us. We got to hear everybody's response. So the group part is actually on the candidate side. So you answer with, your peers. It's kind of like a mass interview style, right? They don't waste time calling in people one by one. They get you all in there in one room, and it's rapid fire. Phone interviews. So these can actually, these are used to commonly screen applicants. You might do a phone interview prior to ever doing a one-on-one or a face-to-face interview. So a lot of times you get that initial phone interview and the HR professional or maybe the hiring manager kind of fills you out, right? So it might be used as a screening process. With the way things have changed and with COVID, you might be doing more phone interviews initially. They kind of have the same set of rules as maybe they sort of have a mix of rules between a one-on-one interview and say like a virtual interview would. On a phone interview, you want to make sure to do things like smile. You want to make sure that you limit your distractions, things like that, like you would in an online interview. But that's also, things like smiling that's also something I'd advise you to do in a one-on-one interview. So it's kind of a weird hybrid.
Yeah, if I can just add a little bit to that, Satin.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. We've had several phone interviews for staff and for different positions, just even within the Career Center. And it's remarkable how much you can tell over the phone, how much you can hear. You can actually tell when someone is not smiling over the phone. You can tell when someone, probably just woke up. You can tell if someone's distracted. All of that comes through the phone. And another thing is the group interviews are becoming more and more popular. We see that a lot, even at the university. They'll call in a poll of about 3 to 5 candidates and bring them in front of the entire team or department, even give them a group project to see how well they mesh together, how well they work together, how well they problem solve together, who stands out, who is more of a supporter, who's more of a leader, and then be able to do one-on-ones with the individuals by breaking up the group. And so you kind of see hybrids of them, just like you mentioned, and those are becoming just more and more widely used.
Yeah, and so with these different types of interviews, my biggest thing is with this, you need to be prepared for all of them. You know, ask the hiring manager, what type of interview is this, you know, or the HR person, whoever contacts you. Can you give me a little more information about what type of interview this is? Is this a one-on-one style interview? Will this be a panel interview? They do, you know, kind of reserve the right to not give you any information, but it never hurts to ask. The takeaway here, though, is to absolutely be prepared for all types of interviews. Virtual interviews, like I said, I am going to kind of hone in on this one a little bit. Virtual or video interviews, right? So, I mean, they can take place over Skype, WebEx, Teams, Zoom. There's quite a few platforms out there. They're becoming more and more popular. Even before COVID, we were seeing a lot of them. I mentioned that I had worked for the Marine Corps. I actually interviewed 100% online because I was not available in Texas. So, you know, Carlos was in on my interview and it was done completely online. And I was able to be competitive with candidates that were actually able to sit in a room. So you can have a very effective virtual interview. Virtual interviews are cost effective. No one's paying you to come in, anything like that. Another thing you're going to see is you can actually pre-record virtual interviews. I know some big companies are doing screening interviews where they actually do video interviews and they're recorded and somebody goes through later and looks at them. These do increase your candidate pool, right? So instead of only looking for local applicants, you can now look like statewide, or you can look across the nation or internationally, right? Because you have this technology that enables you to now interview these candidates. And of course, with COVID, this is standard practice. You're likely not going to be called in for an interview initially. Virtual or video interviews come with their own unique set of challenges, and I am going to talk about some of those things. The biggest kind of challenge you're going to face with these video and virtual interviews is your setup, right? You need to make sure that your technology is on point. If they're meeting on WebEx and you've never used WebEx before, you need to download the program a day or two before and make sure that you're ready to go and that you're familiar with it. Those are kind of some basic things. You know, if your microphone quality is a little bit shoddy, maybe you invest in a Bluetooth or something to that nature. And I think those are kind of standard practice for a lot of students and maybe some of our participants, right? Because we're all kind of used to dealing with technology. I think the things that we don't think about are things like find a window or a lighting source. You actually want the lighting source to be in front of you when you interview. If the light source is behind you, you're going to appear dark. And the thing with virtual interviews or video interviews is if you have any problems with lighting or your technology, it's difficult for the interviewer to separate the candidate from the things that go wrong. So if you've got some shoddy lighting or some shoddy technology, that is going to reflect on the package that you're bringing to these future employers. So that's why you kind of need to be mindful of these things. Make sure you pick your location deliberately. Maybe you don't want to be laid out on your couch for your interview. Instead, you kind of want to stage your area and sit up straight. Pick your outfit carefully. If the walls in your house are beige or white, do not pick a beige or a white shirt. You will look like a floating head. And make sure you eliminate distractions, pets, children, things like that. Turn your phone on silent. If you've got, I know for this seminar, I actually had to close down my email because when my email pops up, I get a ding, right? And I just can't have those distractions while I'm in the middle of something. Make sure that you stage your location. So you don't want anything polarizing in the background. And some things that you might not think are polarizing can be polarizing, right? Even I always reference sports teams, right? If I'm a die-hard Cowboys fan and you've got a Houston flag in the background, how does that make me feel, right? So that kind of thing. You want to think about those things. Yes, you're proud of, your team and everything like that, but what is that going to say about your future employer? Another kind of example, I recently participated in a webinar where someone was interviewing a candidate for an executive level position. But the candidate was actually sitting in their childhood bedroom. And so you could see like their high school trophies and things like that. Now this candidate is interviewing for an executive level position, but the background, his high school bedroom, screams entry level, right? So just kind of things to think about. You're used to it, you see it every day, right? But you really want to pick like your surroundings and your outfit carefully. You don't want to be a floating head, and you don't want to be in a polarizing and cluttered environment. Keep it as neutral as you possibly can. And finally, you want to practice making eye contact. Don't stare at yourself in that little box in the bottom of your screen. You want to practice actually looking into the camera, because this will actually give the illusion to the presenter that you're making eye contact. So just some things to think about in your video interview that we might not necessarily think about when we're face-to-face. In addition to different types of interview, some people actually classify these as types of interviews. I don't. I kind of classify them as things that can happen in an interview. So if you say that you're a pro with Excel and you go into this interview, they might do a one-on-one with you and then set you down at a computer and give you a skills test, right? So make sure that whatever you put in your resume that you're able to back up in an interview. If you type 60 words a minute and they sit you down for a typing test, be ready to go. Don't be caught off by a skills test. A lot of times when I interviewed for this position, I was required to give a presentation, right? So be prepared for those kinds of things. Also be prepared that you might be invited out to coffee or a meal. These things are becoming increasingly more common as well. If you are invited out to a meal, go ahead and let your host order first if possible. Try to keep it clean. Don't order anything messy. Don't get a burger with chili. Don't get wings, those kinds of things. And try to keep it pretty plain Jane. Don't order anything extensive. This is not the time to rack up somebody else's corporate credit card. If they order coffee, just keep it to coffee, that kind of thing. Kind of mirror your host should that happen. And the last one I'd like to advise about is an impromptu interview. We're going to talk briefly about a traditional question called your elevator pitch, your 30-second commercial. It's one of those things you should always be ready for. Always be prepared to interview, because I have talked to plenty of people that have been in the right place at the right time, and somebody's been like, you know what, I kind of like how you did that. Can you sit down and tell me more about yourself? And that becomes an impromptu interview, and the next thing they know, they're sitting in an HR desk. So always be prepared to interview, always be prepared to talk about yourself and your accomplishments. So because it could happen, you could be discovered in your own right. Now, prior to your interview, I stress the importance of research. And research is important because it helps you predict what's going to happen in the interview. It assists you with answering your questions. It allows you to feel more prepared and confident. And it showcases your kind of dedication, your attention to your detail, and your professionalism. So you need to start doing research. It is an important part of your interview process. It shows that you're interested in the company, and you're going to bring something extra to the table, because not everybody does their research, and the people that do their research, they do stand out. Carlos, when you were interviewing people for the career consultant position, can you weigh in on this? Were you able to tell who did their research and who didn't?
Yes, absolutely. We always have candidates do a presentation, just like you mentioned. And there was one in particular that I remember that instead of putting the UTD logo, he had another university logo on the presentation. And so even though he tried doing research, but it just wasn't the right research. And so it does show up, it does stand out, and it's much more impressive when you have someone presenting to you that has already been through your website, already knows the resources you have, already knows the different teams, already has, in a sense, started to put themselves into the department and knows their stuff. It makes them look a lot more competent, and it makes them look a lot more confident when they're presenting.
Yeah, I think that's a great way that Carlos put it. When you do your research and you're familiar with the organization, employers can see you there. Whereas, you know, if you don't do your research and you just kind of wing it, you kind of look like an outsider, right? So it does help future employers kind of get a feel for you and see how you're going to fit into this organization. What to research? You should be researching interview questions. You should revisit the job listing for like duties, qualifications, and responsibilities, because when you start to answer some of these interview questions, you can relate them to the job description. So again, the employer can see you in that role, how you would handle that role. You want to research as much as you possibly can industry and company information. And the reason these things are important, you want to know about the company culture. If it's a culture that is focused on teamwork, not the individual, that kind of thing. Were there any newsworthy events that maybe they're recovering from, or that maybe was kind of a bruise that you don't want to mention? Maybe they recently partnered with an organization that you're passionate about, and so it's a great opportunity to merge, you know, professional and passion, and kind of display that thing, showcase that talent about yourself. It'll also give you an idea of the demographics. You know, is the workplace a diverse workplace? Is that something that's important to you? Is diversity important to you? If so, you know, if the makeup is 80% man, is that important to you? Do you want to work with people that are like you, or do you want to work with a more diverse population? It'll also help you become more acquainted with their mission and their vision. So when somebody starts asking questions like, why do you think you're the right fit for this company? You can absolutely turn around and say with confidence, your mission and vision aligns with my own personal values with X, Y, and Z. Another thing with research. So I don't spend a lot of time in this webinar talking about dress code. And the reason being is because it's such a loaded topic. We could have a webinar based on dress code by itself and talk all day about different situations and different things to wear and what my opinion is, what somebody else's opinion is, and things like that. But if you do your research, you'll be able to see what the company culture is and kind of what is expected of you. So if the company has more of like a lax culture, like I have a friend that works for Dell and she interviewed with pink hair and it was totally acceptable and she got a job, right? If the company culture is a little more laid back and you show up in your best suit, you might look a little bit like an outsider. If the company is more traditional, say if you're interviewing with like a government organization and you show up with pink hair and chucks, you probably don't look like you fit there. So by doing your research, you can help bring that professional profile that looks like it fits with that company. So research, again, can help you kind of know what professional package to bring. Is it a little more relaxed or is it more traditional? So these are resources for doing your research. You need to check out the company's social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, all of the social medias, all of them. Go to the company's website and find out what they are. You also need to do some kind of back-end research. What are people saying on Indeed and Glassdoor about this company? Is it a good company to work for? When you look at these reviews, if the reviews start saying the same thing over and over and over again, that's something you might want to put on your radar. It's something you might want to discuss within the interview. If it's, you know, positive, I've heard you've had a really great corporate culture. Can you tell me more about your culture? You know, things like that. If it's kind of a problem area, I would keep it on your radar and probably don't discuss negatives in your interview, but it is something you want to think about. Vault is a really great resource that the Career Center has. You are able to access that as UTD students. And I know when I interviewed with UTD, I actually utilized Vault to kind of look up UTD and gain some information there. So utilize all these resources and even ask your network. You know, if you're on LinkedIn and lo and behold, you know, George that you went to high school with is actually working for this company now, tap into that and ask him, you know, what can you tell me about this company? What do you enjoy about it? So absolutely utilize what's out there and look at all of these resources as well as the company's website itself. Go straight to the horse's mouth. If the company has a website, absolutely start looking into it and see what image they are trying to project.
And if I can add one more, even when you are looking on Handshake for different positions, if you scroll down to the bottom, you can see other students that have already worked there, and you can even see their reviews as well. And sometimes they even post example interview questions, and they'll even give you the ups and the downs about the interview. So take a look at that. And like you mentioned, Satin Vault is one that we have as a resource in the Career Center. And that one has a lot of information, actual intern reviews, a lot of feedback from people that have already worked there that gives you information that gives you information about the company before you ever even apply, so that you know what the company culture is.
Yeah, and then this way, if you do your research and the interview seems a little, you know, maybe you weren't on your A game or maybe you didn't feel like they were, you know, this might help you make that decision. It's only going to give you more information, and the more information that you have, the more empowered you're going to feel going in. So I am going to talk about the STAR formula, and the STAR formula is kind of how we advocate for you to answer these interview questions. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to talk about the STAR formula, kind of introduce you to it, because I'm going to go in more into depth later. You might have heard, if anybody's worked with the Career Center on their resumes, we utilize the STAR formula then too. But the STAR formula is also it's something that you should be utilizing when you do these interview questions. And the great thing about the STAR formula is it's kind of your secret weapon. If you kind of memorize this and someone asks you a question, you can think to yourself, situation, action, task, result, right? So you know how to answer that question already. And it kind of helps you keep on task, right? So if you find yourself starting to ramble a little bit about maybe the situation and the task, maybe you can kind of trigger yourself to get back on point and kind of talk about the actions and the result, because a complete answer is kind of going to have all of these elements. This formula doesn't 100% work for all questions, but some elements of this formula should be included in most of your interview questions. And again, it just is a really great way to showcase your talents. So when we talk about situation, we want you to describe the event or the situation you're in. And then we want you to talk about what you had to do, the task. What were you going to accomplish? What actions you took to accomplish it, and the results. A lot of people like to leave out the results statement. Don't leave out the result statements, because that's usually what kind of seals the deal. You were so good at this. This was the situation. This is what you did, and you were so great at it. This is what happened. So I always have to remind students, don't forget about the results. Don't forget what happened because you were so on point that day. So make sure not to leave out that result portion. So I'm going to come back to the STAR statements when we start talking about the types of interview, and I'll kind of break down the STAR statement for you. Normally in face-to-face, I kind of have students and participants write STAR statements for me or with me together, but unfortunately we're not able to do that in this medium. So what I've kind of done here is I'm going to go over each type of interview question, and then I'm going to kind of break down the answers according to the STAR statement. So we have behavioral and situational interviewing, and this type of question is really based on how would you respond, right? So it's usually going to give you a situation. Tell me about a time that you and a supervisor had a disagreement. Or what would you do if a customer came in upset, right? So it's measuring your behavior within a certain confine. So these are going to be your behavioral or your situational questions, and they usually start with some kind of phrase like, tell me about a time, or what would you do if? So that's how you kind of know. And that's when these should light up in your brain STAR statements, right? Because, and you want to keep your answer kind of short. And if you stick with kind of in the confines of that STAR statement, you generally won't go over like that 2-minute window. You want to keep your answers kind of within that 2-minute time frame. Traditional interview questions, these are kind of the, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Why do you want to work for this company? Tell me about yourself. Those are going to be your traditional questions, and you should always be prepared for at least 1 or 2 of those. I've never been a part of an interview that didn't ask me, I don't know, I'd probably say at least 2. It is kind of the standard in interview practices that they are going to lead with tell me about yourself. Some interviews are weighted. There is a point system. Oftentimes the tell me about yourself question isn't weighted, but it is your introduction, and you should fully be prepared to answer the question, tell me about yourself. And I will go over that a little bit in more detail as well. Unique questions, I'm sure everybody's kind of heard about these. I think Google was notorious for a little while about answering these questions. They're fun. They allow you, I have been asked unique questions. I'll share those, some of those with you later. They are fun. They give the candidate kind of a glimpse into your personality, maybe your problem solving abilities. Some of them might be along the lines of a riddle, you know, that kind of thing. And it just gives the employer something else to kind of weigh your professional package. Technical questions are going to be job specific. They're going to be related to the task at hand. If you're interviewing for an accountant position and you can't tell me, you can't tell me how to calculate net income, that's probably a red flag for me. Illegal questions, unfortunately, they happen. So I like to put them on the radar just because I kind of like to, I will a little bit, well, actually, so illegal interview questions, I like to have participants be prepared. Should you be asked an illegal interview question? It's a sticky situation to handle, right? So there might not be malice involved. It might just be somebody that didn't know they couldn't ask that, right? But you know that they can't ask that. And so you want to kind of handle it as tactfully as you can. You can tell someone, I believe this question is inappropriate. I don't feel comfortable with answering it. That is your option. So I always just tell my participants and those that I coach, do not answer a question that you do not feel comfortable answering. Politely decline, be like, well, I don't feel right about this, right? And move on, but keep your professionalism. And also keep in mind that a company, if you feel like, this company was kind of testing you or putting you under some sort of pressure, maybe that's an indication that it's not the right spot for you. So behavioral interview questions, again, normally we kind of do an activity, right? But I have to throw this kind of text at you in this case. So this is describe a time when you followed a policy which you didn't agree with. I have heard this question a bunch. Describe a time that you were given directive from a manager and didn't agree with the situation. Tell me about a time you had to work with, somebody that insisted on doing this and you didn't agree with it. So this is a pretty common one. This answer, when I worked as an assistant manager, I was always looking for a way to boost my employees' morale. Unloading trucks is very routine and physical, and it became boring and exhausting. So to improve the unloaders' attitude towards their duties and make the best of the situation, I put a radio in the receiving dock. It worked. However, the district manager did not approve of the radio in the workplace, even though it did not interfere with policy. I did not agree with the supervisor's decision to remove the radio. However, I promptly complied with his request. The employees were unhappy. I then found an alternative incentive program which provided lunch for the unloaders from a restaurant of their choosing. The program succeeded in decreasing their unloading time from 2.5 hours to 1.5 hours. This is a STAR statement answer, okay? Situation, I was an assistant manager. Task, I wanted to boost my employees' morale. The action I took, I put a radio in there. However, this action wasn't, kind of received well. In response, I complied. I found an alternative, and my result was 2.5 hours to 1.5 hours. So again, I like the result statement because it puts a little bow on the situation. This employee, this person that interviewed with me, has saved time, and time is money. And if you saved me time, you saved me money. And if you did it for this employer, I can assume that you will try and do it for me. So this is kind of what I'm talking about with those STAR statements. You want to kind of paint the picture, let them know what you did, and then just kind of wow them with the end result. And maybe it doesn't have a number like this, and maybe it's not time, maybe it's, you know, you received an award, you received departmental recognition, you received grant money, you received, you know, whatever it is. It's not always necessarily going to be money. It might be a percentage, you might reduce receivables, things like that. You might improve customer satisfaction. Those are all results, and they kind of really make the statement stand out. Traditional questions, tell us about yourself. So again, if anybody ever interviews and they don't ask you, tell me about yourself, then shoot me an email, because I would like to know, because I really haven't heard anyone participate in an interview where they weren't asked this. And a lot of people are thrown off by this question. This is kind of what I consider a traditional question, and this is a question you should be able to answer if you're walking down the street and Carlos approaches you and he says, tell me about yourself. This is not a time, Carlos?
Oh yeah, I was just going to add that it is probably the most common question. Usually the first question when you sit down for an interview is to tell me about yourself. So you're absolutely right, Satin. This is the one that everyone should have prepared. This is your kind of like your elevator pitch. Like, you should be prepared with this at any time, and you should always work on it. You should always evolve it and modify it to who you're talking to. But this is definitely the most common question you'll ever see.
Yes, and so again, you'll get this at expos. When you go to career expos, recruiters will shake your hand and say, tell me about yourself. And you need to have something prepared. It might vary a little bit every single time, but you kind of want to stick to some general guidelines. This is not the time to talk about anything personal. Even if you throw in there, you know, I have 2 dogs. What if I'm a cat person? Or what if you tell me you like peanut butter and I'm deathly allergic, right? We want to kind of stick to the professional attributes. So this is not really a time to talk about anything too personal. It is a time to talk about your passion, what you have enthusiasm for. You can talk about your future career goals. Here, I wrote this for our mascot, and it says, I have served as a mascot and inspiration for the UTD community since 1998. I'm passionate about fostering a sense of community and spirit. I'm well versed in all subjects of sports and recreation. So he's telling me what he has a passion for, what his professional attributes are, and he's told me a little bit about his background, you know, and generally you wrap up with something like, I'm excited to be here. I'm happy, I'm excited to meet you, those kinds of things. So that'll always kind of conclude your 30-second commercial. So just kind of know, you know, throw a little information in there about your background. Maybe I'm a recent graduate. I just graduated with my bachelor's in business administration, and I'm looking to pursue marketing within an organization that allows me for growth. I'm passionate about, you know, social media development, things like that. So make sure you really hone in on what your professional attributes are. Carlos, do you have anything to add? Because this is a big one. If you walk away with anything from this, I think this would probably be it. Go get your 30-second commercial ready, your elevator pitch. Tell us about yourself. This is a big one.
Yeah, and you never know when you're going to have to be able to say it to a recruiter, just like it sounds, you know, elevator pitches. You could be stepping in an elevator with someone. You could be in the parking lot. You could be volunteering somewhere. You could be introduced to someone, and you not even know that that is going to be your connection to your next job. And so you need to be prepared and know who you are. This goes back to knowing who you are first, knowing what you have to bring, and knowing how to speak to it. A lot of times we don't really self-evaluate, and so we don't know how to phrase it when we speak to someone. So practice it. Practice it with us. Practice it by yourself. Practice it in the mirror, and be prepared at all times. I can tell you that one of the best jobs I ever had was because I met someone when I was volunteering, and that person saw the work and the ethic that I put into a project in the neighborhood. And just so happens he was a big business owner in the community. And he came up, I introduced myself, and he said, well, are you looking for a job? And I said, no, not really, but what do you have in mind? And that led me to my next position, which I really enjoyed for the next several years. So you never know where it's going to come from. Always be prepared.
Absolutely. Okay. Unique interview questions. All right. So this is kind of what I was mentioning before. And these are kind of just going to give an employer a glimpse into your personality. I interviewed for an accounting job. I actually have a background in accounting. And when I interviewed for an accounting job, they asked me a few accounting questions. And the last question they asked me was, tell me what your favorite cartoon is. I happen to be obsessed with cartoons, so I was actually really excited about this, and you know, it gave them a little insight into, you know, kind of what I enjoyed in my free time, and I was able to kind of answer it with a different kind of enthusiasm. And so I like unique interview questions. I don't think you see them a lot anymore. I think most companies are kind of getting away from them because they can be a little polarizing. But, you know, this is kind of the time to have a little fun and to answer honestly. You know, who would you have dinner with? You know, but keep in mind, if you answer, you know, say a political figure or something like that, it can be kind of polarizing, and it might turn some people off. So, you know, proceed with caution, keep it light, keep it neutral. But, you know, the most inappropriate interview question or interview answer, I think, is I don't know. Try to come up with something. Technical interview questions, like I said before, these are job specific. How do you calculate net income? Name a Supreme Court case that impacts this firm's daily legal practice. How do you dispose of motor oil, right? So these are questions you either know the answer to or you don't. You're not going to necessarily utilize the STAR statement method here unless they ask you, tell me about, you know, name a Supreme Court case that impacts this firm's daily legal practice and tell me about a time that you utilized this, right? So a technical question could be immediately followed by a situational correct question. So, you know, describe the proper procedure for disposing of motor oil and tell me about a time that you witnessed someone do this procedure incorrectly and how you corrected it. That kind of thing. So these can kind of be mixed in with things. So make sure that you do know your kind of technical aspects as well going into these interviews. If you, again, going back to Excel, if they say, you know, you mentioned that you were an expert with Excel, can you walk me through how to do a VLOOKUP? You know, make sure that you're prepared to answer those things. So don't forget your technical skills. So this is just some general guidelines and best practices, and this is for all, I tried to keep this for all interviewing. You want to be yourself. Don't go in there over rehearsed. Don't go in there with a script. Don't go in there portraying something that you are not going to be. I think the best advice I ever got, I got from a professor, and he said, look, I'm not funny. I don't try to be funny. So if you're not funny, don't be funny. You know, if you're, you know, if you're not an extrovert like myself, you know, don't portray yourself as one. There really is a place in the workforce for everyone. Don't feel like you have to be an extrovert. When I look for people to join my team, I want them to have qualities that I kind of don't, because I need them to excel where I am kind of weak. So absolutely be yourself. Keep it professional, but be yourself. Make sure you minimize your distractions. If you're on the phone and somebody calls you while you're driving, please pull over. This shows the employer, you know, oh, look, they're responsible. it is unlikely that you're going to ask someone, oh, can you give me just a second so I can pull over, and they're going to say no. So please take the time to be safe and minimize your distractions. Stop doing other tasks. Just let them know. I can't tell you how many webinars I've been on where, you know, a supervisor or a facilitator had to stop and say, I'm sorry, my child walked into the room. We're all in a position right now where, you know, kids are home, dogs are crazy. And people generally understand being human. So, you know, let them know, can you give me just 1 minute so I can minimize these distractions and give you my full attention? Make sure you're prepared. Even if the interview is virtual, make sure that you have your resume nearby. Or at least pulled up on the screen. I would, if you can, print it. That way, necessarily, you can maybe hang it behind you and still kind of manage to make that eye contact, because when you switch over on these virtual formats, I know if I were to switch over and look at something, you would kind of see it. So you would have to break that kind of eye contact. But again, they might expect it. You might be able to say, well, let me consult this really quick, that kind of thing. But make sure you always have your resume on hand during an interview. Hard copy, digital copy, whatever it is, and make sure that you're very well versed in your resume. There's nothing more embarrassing than not knowing what's on your resume. I have interviewed candidates before, and I'll be like, oh, your resume says here that, and I got blank stares. So it kind of indicates to me maybe one, that you're lying, or maybe two, you didn't write it. So you really want to be well versed in your resume. Go ahead and prepare. So when we talked about traditional questions, I should have actually, and going forward, I'm actually going to put a slide that says a traditional question listed as, do you have any questions for us? Know that the standard is yes. Employers do kind of expect you to ask a question, and the reason being is this displays your interest. So if I ask a candidate a question, you know, I ask them, do you have any questions for us? Is there anything I can tell you about this position? And they say no, it can display your level of interest in the position. So have some paper nearby with some questions, or maybe you jot down things. I had a colleague that would write down questions in interviews, and that was her thing. And no one ever expressed displeasure by her taking notes during an interview. So make sure that you do have those questions prepared for the employer, because like the tell me about yourself question, it is kind of an expectation that a candidate that's interested will have follow-up questions. Make sure, this one's kind of tough because we do apply online now for jobs, right? Most everything is done online. And so once a job listing closes, it's hard to pull that job listing back up again. So some of us might be out there, you know, just pumping out these resumes and applying to everything that we can keep of, and it can be difficult to start keeping up with these job listings, depending on how aggressive you are in your search. But kind of try to make note and, you know, copy and paste, or maybe, you know, print to Adobe, and kind of keep a list of these job listings if you can. That way you can refer back to it. And again, familiarize yourself with the job listing. And then that way, when you're asked these questions, you can think back to the job listing and relate your experience for the position that they're looking for. Because really, when you answer these questions, it should be personal, and it should display your professionalism, not just what you did in your job, but how well you did it. Again, make eye contact. Sorry, go ahead, Carlos.
If I can add something, Satin,
Sure.
One of the things that we often hear from employers that come into the Career Center and interview students is that they don't come to hire robots. They don't come to hear just the robotic answers to questions. They want to hear the student, they want to hear the candidate, they want the personality to come out, they want to see if you're also a good fit for their company culture. So they want your uniqueness to come out. Yes, they want to hear a good answer, but they want to hear you in that answer, because that's also what's going to be the deciding factor for whether or not they follow up with another interview or not. So They don't come to hire robots. Be yourself. Be genuine, just like Satin said. Be authentic with yourself, with your questions, with your interview, because they are looking to see who you are, not just what answers you give. And as far as the asking the questions piece, that is huge. Just like you said, that's a big piece, because that is your opportunity to interview them. That is your opportunity to show them exactly how much you have researched. That is your opportunity to ask more about the internship position, or ask them about the future plans for the company in the next 5 years. Or maybe if you read that they are buying out another company, you can ask them if there's going to be open internship opportunities out in that area. Or even ask them questions that will qualify you. Maybe ask them, what is it that you'll see, what is it that you see that I need to work on in order to be a better candidate for this position? Or can you tell me about yourself and your experience coming into this position? Put them on the spot, make them qualify you, make them answer those questions for you. And that is a huge opportunity for you to really take the lead and find out if it is a good fit for you.
Yeah, and make sure if you do kind of ask these, follow-up questions, make sure that you leave on a high note, right? Make sure that you try not to ask any kind of negatives, things like that, because you do kind of want to leave on a high note. So don't ever focus, so much on what the company can do for you. Make sure you stay away from that when you do ask these questions. Is there room for advancement, stuff like that? Those questions can be a little bit polarizing and might seem kind of aggressive. Definitely stay away from asking things like, well, what are the benefits, right? It's not the interview is not necessarily the time to start negotiating your benefits and your salary, right? This is just everybody's feeling each other out, that kind of thing. And you want to make sure the company knows what you're bringing to the table, not necessarily what you want to take away from the table. Do activities that increase your professionalism. I'm going to hit on this with online. I am kind of more of a laid back facilitator. However, I always wear a jacket when I facilitate, right? Because it makes me feel professional, okay? If you ran into me out in the street, I have a completely different feel than I do in a professional seminar. And even though my professional style is a little more laid back and a little more friendly, you're gonna get two different people, because when I put on my professional outfit, I act and feel differently, right? I bring a different package than I would say if you ran into me at a Rangers game. It's just completely different. So I highly advocate, even with these phone interviews and these virtual interviews, get dressed. wear the full outfit, right? Okay. A lot of people, you've seen the internets and the memes, they're getting dressed from the waist down. Okay. What are you going to do if the person asks you to stand up? Or what are you going to do if you need to step away and go get something? Maybe you accidentally left your resume a few steps away from you and you need to stand up and go get it. How are you going to navigate these things online? So it's just best to go ahead and dress from, top to bottom, right? And I know I've seen the memes, I've seen everything out there, but my recommendation is you dress fully professionally for your virtual interviews. You'll feel like a professional and you'll act like a professional. So, and you want to portray that professional package even over the phone. If you get up and get dressed, you feel like your work persona, right? It's like Superman and Clark Kent. Do let some of your body language do the talking in interviews. Again, like Carlos said, nobody wants to hire robots, right? So I tend to kind of talk with my hands. I think everybody does. Know that you do it and make sure that it's not over the top. But allow yourself to do some of that body language. Just make sure you're not flailing around in your seat. With your body language, if you kind of have like a nervous tic, if you tap your pen or you shake your leg, be aware of it. So when it starts to happen, you can control it. But do let your body language do some of the talking, because again, that's kind of your natural persona, right? It displays kind of who you are. It can display enthusiasm. If you're sitting on your hands and, you know, answering according to a script, you don't appear friendly. This is another big one. These actual last couple ones are pretty big on my list as far as general guidelines go. Do not bash your former employers under any circumstances. For me, when I'm interviewing someone and they bash a former employer, it kind of tells me that maybe the problem was them. If they can't find one good thing to say about a former employer, the problem might not have been the employer, it might have been the employee. So under no circumstance should you bash your former employer. Find the most diplomatic and polite way to say that you have moved on, and find something positive to say about them. There had to have been one thing, you know, maybe you just worked with one person that you thought was stellar, but don't bash your former employers. The only negative image, it portrays a negative image, and it portrays it on you, not the former employer. Do have a plan to follow up. Some of the text is a little outdated and says, you know, send a thank you note. Well, if you interviewed with Amazon, don't send a thank you note to Jeff Bezos. He's not going to get it, right? Nobody is going to get it. But do have a plan to follow up. You know, maybe you reach out to HR. Maybe the hiring manager provided their email, and you just want to say thank you for meeting with me. Do have a plan to follow up. When you ask these questions of the employer, that can be one of your questions. You know, what is the timeline that you're looking at to, you know, bring a candidate on? That can definitely be one of your questions to follow up with. If they say, well, we're looking to have somebody, you know, trained and ready to go in the next 3 weeks, maybe your plan to follow up is in the next 2. Right, so have a plan to follow up. Follow up is important. It's not going to be kind of in the traditional sense of like sitting down and writing a thank you letter. It might be, you know, checking in with HR, or the hiring manager, or maybe placing a phone call. But do have some sort of plan to follow up. You also want to practice, okay? So you want to practice answering these types of questions. If someone were to ask me right now on the spot, Tom, what is your weakness? I have an answer, okay? Because I teach other people how to interview, and because I've answered it enough times, you know, I know that my weakness is that sometimes I will burn out administratively, right? I don't have a real enthusiasm for paperwork. You know, I do know that's kind of my weakness. I know my strength is the fact that I can get excited about almost anything, you know, so I can bring enthusiasm to the table. I just know these things, and I know how to answer these types of questions. Tell me about yourself. I'm going to talk to you about my master's, my undergraduate degree, how I've been overseas for the past few years, you know, those kinds of things, because I have practiced these responses. So absolutely practice these questions, and you can absolutely Google, you know, common interview questions. I just gave you some common interview questions. There list of common interview questions that you can absolutely practice answering. Practice answering them in the mirror, practice them answering with a friend. You can make an appointment with me, we can practice them. We do actually, the Career Center has an incredible resource called Interview Stream. Anybody that's on today, if you're interested in some additional practice, Interview Stream, we would send you an interview, we would assign you this interview, and you can answer these questions in the privacy of your own home, and they are recorded. And then you would self-assess, and we would view the video and your response, and we would hit you back with some feedback. So this kind of interview stream allows you to interview in the privacy of your own home. It allows you to see your response. It allows you to see what you do when no one else is around. And it also allows you to get some feedback from a coach like Carlos or I, depending on your school. If you're interviewing in a certain field, you can always hit me up for an appointment and say, hey, I'm interviewing in this, you know, IT department or with this economics related field. And I can go and hunt down some economic or IT related questions, and I can personalize this interview for you. So if anybody wants to practice interviewing, please absolutely reach out to us. We would love to walk you through Interview Stream, and it is an incredible resource. And so final thoughts, we're cutting it close here a little bit, I think. So this was a quote that someone shared with us the other day, and I just really liked it as it relates to interviewing. Be confident, but not arrogant. Prepared, but not mechanical. Professional, not cold. Assertive, but not aggressive. Friendly, but not cavalier. And available, but not needy. And I think if you kind of hit on all of these, kind of final thoughts in your interview, I think you'll present a really great package. So that kind of wraps it up for us. I'm going to share our virtual office hours with you guys. If you ever want to reach out to me or Carlos, we are available for appointments for Handshake. Did we have any questions, Carlos?
No, I think we covered everything, Satin.
Okay, perfect. All right, so if you guys have any questions for us, we'll hang out for a couple seconds, see if anything rolls in, but that wraps it up for us. Carlos, did you have anything you wanted to add before we?
Sure. Just emphasizing again, Interview Stream. It's a really good resource, and it's available to all students, and it's on there by different topics, by different majors. You can actually see yourself. You can even rate yourself. You can send it to your professor. You can send it to us. And as you mentioned, Satin, it's practice. It gets better as you go along. So even practicing on Interview Stream, practicing in front of a mirror so you can see your own gestures and your facial expressions. Practice with a friend, just as much as you can, just practice. That way you can build up the confidence, and then you can be more competent when it comes to talking about yourself and your skills and giving those behavioral answers. A lot of times we have those answers, we're just not used to talking about it. A lot of us are taught to be very humble since we've been young, so we're not used to talking about ourselves. But this is one space where you're allowed to toot your own horn. You are allowed to talk about your strengths. You are even open enough to talk about your weaknesses. You are able to talk about your accomplishments. This is one place where that is allowed.
All right. Well, thank you everybody that joined us. If you have any questions, go ahead and shoot us an email or hit us up on Handshake. But that concludes this seminar.